Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this snowy Monday. We are here to talk about multiplying whole numbers, fractions, and mixed numbers. So I have a couple examples here that we're going to kind of go through just as a quick review. The first one is 3 times 1/4. So when we are multiplying whole numbers and fractions, there's a couple different things that we have to do. One, we're going to draw a model. So the first problem here is 3 times 1/4. In order to represent that model, I have to draw 3 circles, rectangles, whatever it is. I'm going to choose to draw 3 rectangles this time. There are my 3 rectangles. And how many pieces do I have to break each of those rectangles up into? Well, I have to look at my fraction. My fraction is 1/4, so I have to break it up into fourths. So I have this. How many pieces do I need to shade in of each of my 3 rectangles? Well, I have to shade in 1/4. Again, looking at my fraction, that's what my fraction tells me. Now, looking at my model here, how many of my pieces are shaded in? There's 1, 2, 3 pieces that are shaded in. That's going to be my numerator. And there are 3 pieces shaded out of how many pieces in a rectangle? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 is going to be my denominator. So the answer to that question is going to be 3/4. If we look down here on the bottom one, I have 2/3 times 4. So again, got to start with my whole number, got to draw 4 rectangles. And how many pieces do I have to break each of those 4 rectangles up into? Right, I got to break them up into thirds. Fraction is 2/3, so I've got to break them up into 2/3. And how many of those third pieces do I need to shade in? Well, I've got to shade in 2 out of the 3. Again, that's my fraction. Now, how many pieces do I have shaded? I have 2, 4, 6, 8 pieces shaded. So I know 8 is going to be my numerator. And that is out of how many pieces in one rectangle? 1, 2, 3. So 3 is going to be my denominator. Many of you should recognize the fraction 8/3 as an improper fraction. These fractions can be changed to mixed numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up to do that. So how many times can 3 go into 8? Well, 3 can go into 8 2 times. 2 times 3 I know is 6. 8 minus 6 is 2. So I can make a mixed number from this as 2 and 2/3. So 8/3 is equivalent to 2 and 2/3. Now, looking at multiplying fraction by fraction, I know many of you picked up on this very quickly. Every time that we're multiplying a fraction by a fraction, I only have to set up one model. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my rectangle. And my problem is 1/2 times 3/5. So the first thing that I've got to do is I've got to break my rectangle up into halves. So cut it into 2 pieces. I'm going to go ahead and shade in 1/2 because that's what my problem tells me. The next thing that I have to do is I have to break my rectangle up into fifths. And I'm going to do this going the opposite direction. So I'm going to do this going horizontally. And because my fraction is 3/5, that means that I have to shade in 3 of those pieces. How many pieces are shaded in both blue and purple? So I have 1, 2, 3 pieces. Therefore, my numerator is going to be 3. And then how many pieces are in the entire rectangle? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 is going to be my denominator. So therefore, the answer to that problem is 3/10. Now, my next problem is 5/8 times 3/4. So again, I'm only going to need one rectangle. I'm going to take that rectangle and I've got to divide it into 8ths first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that going vertically. So here's my rectangle broken up into 8ths. I would have to shade in 5 of those 8ths. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can tell just by looking at that 5/8 is more than a half. I know that a half is 4/8. Now, horizontally, I'm going to break it up into 4ths, and then I've got to shade in 3 out of those 4ths. So this is going to leave me with quite a few pieces. So I have that. Now we've got to count the number of pieces that are shaded in both blue and purple. So I counted 15 pieces, therefore I know that's going to be my numerator. And how many total blocks are there in my rectangle? Right, there's 32 total blocks, so that's going to be my denominator. So therefore my answer to that problem is going to be 15/32. Now, moving on to multiplying mixed number by a fraction. I know I said the other day in class this is kind of tricky for me, and it still is, but we're going to push through it. We're going to use our growth mindset to get us through it. The first question that I have is 1 1/2 times 3/4. So again, I'm going to show you the model for it. On this one, because we're dealing with mixed numbers, I do have to have 2 rectangles. And I have to have 2 rectangles because I'm dealing with the mixed number 1 1/2. And so if we think about 1 1/2, it's closer to 2 than it is just 1, so that way I can show you everything. So I have to take my rectangles and I have to split them in half first, simply because I'm dealing with the mixed number 1 1/2. And I'm going to shade in to represent 1 1/2. So I'm going to shade in this entire model. And I'm going to shade in half of the other one. So that's kind of what it's going to look like. Then I'm going to take my blue, and I've got to horizontally shade in or draw 3/4 and then shade in 3 of those pieces. And I have to do that on the whole one and the half one over here. So there's what I've done. I can extend the lines all the way across. Doesn't matter, that's fine. And I've got to shade in 3 of those 4ths. So there's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I've shaded in 3/4 of each box. How many squares are colored in both blue and red? Right, so I have 9 squares colored in blue or red, so that means that 9 is going to be my numerator. how many squares are represented in just one rectangle here? There's 8, so that's going to be my denominator. Again, the fraction 9/8 is an improper fraction, so I can set this up to divide and make it a mixed number. I know that 8 can go into 9 one time. 1 times 8 is 8. 9 minus 8 is 1. So I've got to make my mixed number from here. I have 1 and 1/8. So 9/8 is the same thing as 1 and 1/8. My next problem that I have down here is 1 3/4 times 4/5. So again, same thing. I have to draw 2 rectangles. This time I have to break them up into fourths. And I've got to shade in 1 3/4. So I'm going to shade in this whole rectangle. And then 3/4 of this other rectangle. So it's going to look kind of like that. Horizontally, I'm going to break it into fifths to represent 4/5. So it looks like that. I've got to shade in 4 of those fifths. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got to look at all the pieces that are shaded in red and blue. So take a close look there. So I've got 28 pieces shaded in blue and red. That is my denominator. Or I'm sorry, that's my numerator. And then how many pieces do I have inside of each rectangle? Well, I have 20 pieces. So my fraction's going to be 28/20. And then I'm going to make this into a mixed number. So I'm going to set up my division problem and go ahead and divide. And when I do that, I get 1 8/20. 8/20 I know can be simplified because those are both even numbers. So I'm going to divide those both. I know 4 can go into both of those. So divide by 4, and then I'm going to get 1 2/5. So 28/20 is the same as 1 8/20, which is equivalent to 1 2/5. So hopefully by now we're understanding multiplying fractions a little bit better, but we will continue to work on this, so please just make sure that you ask your teacher if you need any help.